Hello. On behalf of the Historical Society of Harford County, welcome to this afternoon's presentation, Under Color of Law, the Story of an American Family, as told by A. Dwight Pettit. Please be aware that this event is being recorded and will be made available publicly through the Historical Society of Harford County webpage and on the Society's YouTube channel. As we go along today, you're invited to use the chat or Q&A features on your viewing screen to submit questions for our speaker. I'm Jackie Seneschal, your host for this virtual Brown Bag Lunch. Our speaker today, A. Dwight Pettit, is a successful civil rights, constitutional, and criminal lawyer. He was the first male African-American student at Aberdeen High School, admitted at the beginning of the 1960-61 school year by order of the U.S. District Court. After graduating from Aberdeen, Dwight went on to attend and graduate from Howard University and Howard Law School. Throughout his career, he's handled many high-profile cases, including a civil rights case for his father. More about that during his presentation. Before we hear from Dwight, however, it's useful to learn a bit about Harford County at the time of the Supreme Court decisions in Brown versus Board of Education. That's 1954 and 1955. Here is the picture provided by Patrick Spicer in Decade of Delay, the Desegregation of Harford County Public Schools. Harford County, rural, largely agricultural, and in the midst of the 1950s post-war prosperity common to most of central Maryland, was, at the time, much like many of its sister counties in Maryland, sleepy, southern, and segregated. Newspapers in Harford County normally acknowledged the existence of African-American persons only under regrettable circumstances, such as the commission of crimes or in racially biased ads. Reading local newspapers led one to believe that only white people married, visited each other, graduated from high school, received promotions, or died. The few obituaries of African Americans often described the deceased in the patronizing words of the day, loyal and hardworking. The sports pages trumpeted the accomplishments of the all-white Bel Air High School football team and other white county athletic teams. The accomplishments of the African American students or teams at the county's segregated high schools were, with some limited exceptions, conspicuous only by their absence. Black and white communities historically existed side by side in relative but distant and generously anonymous harmony. In the 1950s, Harford County entered a period of consolidation and school construction that included consolidated schools for African American children in grades 1 through 12 at Hickory in 1951 and Havre de Grace in 1954. As the Supreme Court considered the Brown case and its companion cases in the fall of 1953, the Harford County public education system remained adamantly committed to the concept of segregation. The dedication of the segregated Havre de Grace Consolidated School on May 9, 1954, took place only 8 days before the Supreme Court issued its first decision in the long-anticipated Brown cases. In May 1955, the Supreme Court issued its opinion in Brown 2. This opinion held that legally sanctioned systems of segregated public education, having been unanimously determined to be unconstitutional, were to be eliminated, quote, with all deliberate speed, unquote, and required that all school districts were to make prompt and reasonable start toward full compliance. However, even in March 1956, after a lawsuit was filed in federal court by the NAACP, the Harford County Board of Education finally adopted a resolution that any child, regardless of race, may make individual application to the Board of Education to be admitted to a school other than the one attended by such child, and The admission was to be granted by the Board of Education in accordance with rules and regulations as it may adopt. In other words, the board would decide on an individual basis whether an African American child could attend an all-white school. The Pettit family moved to this Harford County, to Aberdeen, in 1958, and thus began Dwight's encounter with the Harford County Public Schools. Dwight, the microphone is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Jackie, and thanks. It's nice to be with you and Bill this morning or afternoon now. Yeah, I had the opportunity when we moved to Aberdeen. My father was an engineer there on post at Aberdeen Proving Ground, and we had no understanding that the schools were still segregated because we had come out of Baltimore County, where the schools were integrated. And so my father just thought he could just take me up and enroll me into the Aberdeen High School. Well, we were very rudely advised that the schools, that couldn't happen, and we had to make the application as you indicated. And so upon me being turned down, my father being, at that time, very active in civil rights and went on to be vice president of the NAACP in Harford County, asked me, did we want to take this matter to court? I did. As a young man, I was really, to be quite honest with you, I was more concerned about playing football, and Aberdeen High School had a football team, where the Black schools or the African-American schools did not. So my dad filed the suit. I had the tremendous opportunity to have Lord Thurgood Marshall, Jack Greenberg, NAACP and the Legal Defense Fund. So I had these great lawyers come into my life to take the case, and we went forward there, winning the litigation later thereon in 1960. Believe it or not, the judge, Roselle Thompson, was chief judge of the U.S. District Court. Even though he ruled in my favor, a lot of people don't realize this. As I look at and read the opinion, Jackie, the opinion seems to be that he went back and adopted Plessy versus Ferguson, which says that the schools were unequal. And for that reason, I was ordered into Aberdeen High School, not so much from the Brown decision. In fact, Thurgood Marshall, as I understand it, was so enraged by Chief Judge Roselle Thompson that he stormed out of court on the second day of the trials and the hearings, according to Mrs. Mitchell and Juanita Mitchell's son, Michael Mitchell, who would later become my law partner, that he was so upset with the judge going back to Ferguson, Plessy versus Ferguson, instead of Brown v. Board, that he left the courtroom. And although he's on the briefs, I'm not sure that he ever came back. But that was the fight that my father brought on behalf of myself and my family and my mother to integrate the schools of Harford County. Because the problem was when we applied, this stair-step plan that you're talking about, Jackie, that the courts and the Board of Education had put into play would integrate a grade per grade at each time. And I was ahead of it. So when integrated the 7th, I was in the 8th. Integrated the 8th, I would be in the 9th. But they did let 3 African-American females into the schools, but not an African-American male, which was myself. And so for 3 years, I had the opportunity to matriculate in Aberdeen High School, graduating in 1963. Had the opportunity to get a tremendous background for college. Had the opportunity to play 3 sports: football, baseball, and wrestling. Although I didn't stick with that too much, but it was a great experience. And I had, that's another whole subject in itself. My relationship was great with the kids and what have you.
Okay, so after you left Aberdeen.
So Jackie, do you want me to continue?
Just continue on, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. After I left Aberdeen, I went on to Howard University. And then I decided, I'd always planned to go to Howard Law School, because I had seen the greatest lawyers in the world had taken my case. And my daddy, my father, George David Pettit, has always indicated to me as a child that he wished he had gone on to be a lawyer because his best friend became a lawyer and one of the most accomplished attorneys in Greensboro, North Carolina. where my dad had gone to college. So I grew up with that in my mind as a kid, that my dad wanted to be a lawyer. I had therefore met some of the greatest lawyers in the country. So it was no doubt to me that I wanted to be a lawyer. So I went into Howard University Law School. I came out in 1970, had the opportunity to, believe it or not, to be hired on affirmative action with the Nixon administration. And from that came back into Baltimore and started a practice. But my practice was started by a major case. Believe it or not, that's my father, George D. Pettit versus the United States was the case, because they basically told him he would never, because of what he did with Aberdeen High School, he would never be promoted again in the federal government. So after 14 years, believe it or not, I had the opportunity to go to undergrad, go to law school, take his case to the second highest court in the nation, the U.S. Court of Claims, now the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. And we won that case on a 4-3 decision, which established for the nation the theory number one of what you're hearing in terms of executive orders. The court ruled that executive orders by presidents could have the foundation of law, which is now being discussed with the new president and last presidents, and also that back pay could be awarded based on those executive orders. And the but-for test, which was the test that would be the determinant of the factual trials or the trials in relationship to whether a person had been discriminated against. In fact, when I would go into court, Jackie, in the first years of my practice, federal court, the judge would look at me and say, "Sir, by any chance, did you have the opportunity to have anything to do with Pettit versus the United States?" And with a big grin on my face, I used to always say, "Yes, George D. Pettit was my father, and I was my father's lawyer." And so that was my breaking into my practice here in Baltimore. And as a result of that, and that being all over the country in terms of magazines and so forth, I started off with a big practice, major practice with Michael Mitchell. At that time, he was he was in the city council, and I went on to have a tremendous practice in terms of civil rights, in terms of criminal law, in terms of police brutality that it has merged into, and having the opportunity to meet some of the greatest lawyers in the country and try some of the biggest civil rights cases. In fact, I think in 2004, I got the largest verdict in the nation for a discrimination case, a police brutality case, $105 million. Now, I'm not saying they ever paid that, but at least I got the verdict. And so that was my cases and so forth. And I'm still very much into the practice of constitutional civil rights law, although a lot of it, believe it or not, has emerged in terms of police brutality, has consumed my practice. And I guess we do 80% of about our practice is police brutality, and I probably won and handle more police brutality cases than any other lawyer in the nation. In fact, we worked with the Department of Justice under the Obama administration, when they came here and filed the consent decree. My office gave them 40 or 50 cases that we were working on and participated with them in terms of getting ready for the consent decree that was filed here in Baltimore City. So I've had a very expansive practice in terms of constitutional law, civil rights, and of course, criminal cases. And as I say in my book, I decided to write the book under color of law because I wanted to, in fact, recognize the work that my father had done in the civil rights era and my mother's support. And I also wanted to acknowledge his movement in the civil rights struggle. And before he died on his deathbed, I promised him that I was going to tell our story. And so I had the opportunity to write the book Under Color of Law. And one of the reasons I wanted to write the book, I didn't know I was going to be so much on point. I wanted to advise the American political base and the American political community that what we were seeing in terms of achievements of civil rights was getting ready to stop. And the nation, this country, was getting ready to go into reverse. I could see it coming in my practice in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I could see that the laws were being changed, they were being weakened and what have you. And so I wanted to let folks know that this struggle for civil rights was not ending. It was something that was still going forth, and we had to be very vigilant into protecting our rights. Otherwise, this country could slip back into pre-civil rights eras. And unfortunately, I was right. And what's happening in America today is everything that I sort of unfortunately predicted in American politics, that this nation would have a right-wing movement that had to, in fact, be understood and combated. I remember one last story I would like to tell. I would go into federal courts in many, many cases, and not only the recognition of my father's case, but I was speaking one time and I was being introduced, and they introduced me as the old civil rights lawyer, not because of my age, because everybody, the people I was speaking to was around my age, but in relationship to the fact that at that time, the civil rights movement in a lot of folks' minds was dead, was over. And I was a relic of the past. I was a dinosaur because the civil rights era had gone. In fact, Chief Justice Roberts said when he struck down the Voting Rights Act, that the basis for his theory of the fact that the Voting Rights Act was no longer necessary because this was a new day of America and discrimination and race was not an issue. How wrong he was. And so as a result of that, I'm still very much in the civil rights practice of law in terms of human rights and justice for all, as well as the criminal justice system.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question to follow up on that, and then we'll get back to Aberdeen. How do you see the push for civil rights now differing from the needs of the 1960s, or does it?
Well,
is it
Jackie,
any
it's
different?
it's different because, as I say in my book and what I was just explaining, we went to sleep as a nation. We thought the struggle was over, especially when we got an African-American president. Everybody was like, discrimination is history. And so we went back to sleep as a nation, as a progressive people, and we saw things like the destruction of the Voting Rights Act of 1967. We saw the weakening of a lot of the accomplishments that we had given blood, sweat, and tears to bring forward in this nation. And so, in answer to your question, I'm not sure that we have awakened for that sleep period of the progressive movements in terms of civil rights. I think we have been awakened now because of Mr. Trump has brought our attention, as well as this nation's attention, to the fact that race is still an issue in America, a major issue in America. Police shootings, police killings, and what have you. Not just that, but this nation, as I indicated, backtracking, going back in terms of its promises, in terms of civil rights. I mean, I look back at Lyndon Baines Johnson. I look back at the Kennedys. And Lyndon Baines Johnson is my favorite president, tremendous president. I go back to the Civil War and I look at Ulysses S. Grant, who was president of the United States after Reconstruction and brought federal troops in against the Klan and what have you. And so this racism in America surfaced its head with the event of Mr. Trump. And we, as a body politic, didn't really see what was coming. And so now we're almost in a position to answer your question of having to restart this progression back to demand the civil rights that we had won, to protect the civil rights that we had won, and to go forward to win the civil rights protections that we need for the future.
So I'm going to take you back to Aberdeen with a question that has bothered me, or has been in the back of my mind after I read your book. You didn't talk about it today, but in your book, you tell the story that when you went to Aberdeen, you went in part because you wanted to be on the football team. You practiced that summer to be the quarterback for the football team, as I understand the story.
And yeah, you're correct.
And about a week before the first football game, the football coach calls you in and says, you can't be the quarterback because the other teams will not accept a Black quarterback. And that was, I know, a very difficult pill for you to swallow as a young man, as it should have been. Did you ever have a chance in later years to talk to the football coach about that? It strikes me that he expected you to be able to be the quarterback. That's why he let you practice all summer long. So he must have been caught by surprise to the level of resistance he encountered. Did you ever talk
Yes,
to him about it?
oh, really, I mean, and not just to him, but other people. The head coach of football in terms of Aberdeen at that time was a man by the name of Jim Smith. And he was just a tremendous man, had been a war hero, everything that you could think of. And so I knew it was not his decision for me not to be able to play quarterback. In fact, it was the junior varsity coach that gave me the news. And so I was able to, when I went out for the varsity team, he made a speech right then and there that this young man is going to be on this team, and anybody that doesn't like it can leave. I used some different language that I'm using. But as I got older and I came back for different affairs, one was to honor him, I began to learn from people in the community that Coach Smith was not just a tremendous man, but he was a tremendous advocate of and supporter of mine as he fought the county council, he fought other people in power for me to be on the team, and places that I had to travel and things that I had to do and places I had to go. And I credit him a tremendous amount for being one of the leading advocates of integration in Aberdeen High School. And one of the people in the background that I had no knowledge was fighting for me as hard as he fought. But because of his reputation and his stature in the community, he was able to support me from the rear in a time that, and in a situation that I had no knowledge about. And if I can just give one football story, if I may, Jackie, we played at the time on the Eastern Shore. We played Wycomico High School. And people that don't know it, the Eastern Shore was just like Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. And as the Lord would have it, in the last minutes of the game, game which was tied, I intercepted the ball for Aberdeen and went 60 yards for the touchdown, for the winning touchdown. And my teammates embraced me and put me on their shoulders and what have you. And Coach Smith came in the shower room and hugged me. What I didn't know at the time, I'd taken off my helmet. So even though I'm light complexion, you could see that I was African-American. What I didn't know at the time, that I think the coach had everybody pick me up and carry me off the field so I could get away from the crowd before they discovered that I was an African-American player on the Aberdeen team. So every place that I went, I was the first to go to a restaurant, the first to integrate the movies, because my teammates were always with me and supportive of me. And it was just a tremendous phenomena in a situation which was highly segregated. That my teammates were like, well, if Dwight Pettit can't come in, we're not coming in. Or if he can't participate, we won't have this celebration here or whatever they were doing. And my best friend at the time was a fellow by the name of John Almasy. And he was the first one to cross the line when I entered Aberdeen High School. And everybody else was whispering in the N-word and what have you. And he was the first person to reach out his hand and says, hey, my name is John Almasy. What's yours? And I said, Dwight Pettit. And we became good friends thereafter. So I had tremendous support from the student body. In fact, I was elected vice president of the Athletic Association and then went on to be elected most personable kid in my senior class. And so I had a great time at Aberdeen High School after I broke those barriers.
In your book, when we talked to the book club at the book club about it, folks were very interested to hear more about your encounters with Muhammad Ali. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I had a great situation being, because of my political involvement, the Muslims would always call me whenever Muhammad Ali was going to be in the area. And it always had a standing invitation to join his entourage, which I always accepted. And as a result of that relationship, I came very close, as one could become close to the world champion, with Muhammad Ali. In fact, every time he was here, we would have dinner together. I would go with him wherever he was going to be. And in fact, believe it or not, we were supposed to do an exhibition together in 1 year for 3 rounds since I had been an athlete. But for political reasons, since I had been nominated to be U.S. Attorney by President Carter, I had to withdraw at the last minute because I didn't want to give the political opposition the opportunity to use that against me. But yes, Muhammad Ali and I were, he's just a fantastic human being. He's so much different than he was in terms of his public persona, in terms of his patience and being around people. He's just a fantastic individual. And Muslims used to bring me into the room and say, Ali, here's your lookalike. And he put up his fist and say, that young man don't look like me. I'm prettier than him. And I say, Muhammad Ali, champ, I never said I was pretty as you. Nobody's pretty as you, champ. And he'd drop his gloves and we'd be all right.
I do want to remind those who are in attendance that if you have a question that you would like for me to ask, Dwight, if you'll just type it into the chat or the Q&A section on your screen, you'll find that by just moving your mouse across the screen, you can type in your questions and I'll be happy to ask them. You mentioned another person that folks had asked me to be sure to ask you about, and that's Jimmy Carter. You said you were a nominee of his, and I know that in your book you talk, having had a few encounters with him. Talk a little bit about President Carter, if you could.
Well, I had the great fortune to meet Jimmy Carter very early when nobody knew who he was. And I just happened to see something where he was speaking at Johns Hopkins University. And I decided from my reading that he had a good shot to be president because he was a Southerner. He could break the Southern strategy and stronghold of the Republican Party. And some things he had done in Georgia just attracted my attention in terms of putting up Martin Luther King's picture and what have you. And so I went to his way of speaking and had the opportunity when he finished speaking, I met him and I gave him a check right on the spot. I called my wife and said, sweetheart, whatever you're doing, please stop. I've just met the next president of the United States. I'm sure of it. And nobody knows it but me. And so she came up and the next week I got a letter and a call, breakfast one-on-one. He thanked me for all the things that I'd done for him in the campaign. And I was with him right on through him being elected president of the United States. In fact, there's a picture in my book where he and his wife and 2 or 3 other couples and my wife and I danced the first dance together at the inauguration ball for Jimmy Carter. And I worked with him through his administration. He tried very much to appoint me U.S. Attorney for Maryland, which would have made me the first African-American U.S. Attorney for a state in the nation, but I didn't get the political support that I needed, God rest his soul, from Senator Sarbanes. And but Carter and I maintained a very, very close relationship throughout the presidency. My wife and I could go to the White House at moment's notice. We were invited to the first state dinners. We were invited to everything that they had at the White House. And I was an advisor to him during his first term, although he didn't listen to all.
Again, you're frozen, so hold on just a second.
Great things if he'd have gotten a second term.
You froze up. So you talked about the fact that you were working as his advisor and then you froze up. So try.
Yes, I was his advisor and not only campaign, but it continued right through to the White House. And he appointed me to the Democratic Compliance Commission, which was a part of the administration political arm. And he tried to appoint me to the U.S. Attorney, if I didn't say this before.
Yeah.
And I would have been the first African-American U.S. Attorney for a state in the nation, but were not able to get the support of, God rest his soul, of Senator Sarbanes. And so I did not receive the appointment, but through no fault to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter did everything that he could do to make me. I was the first Black African-American campaign chairperson in the nation, a person of African-American descent to be that high in the presidential campaign. And he tried very much to make me the first United States attorney. Well, it was, he asked me through Andy Young. He said, Dwight, Andy Young one day we're doing something in the campaign. He says, Jimmy wants to know, what do you want in the administration? And I said, I want to be counsel to the president, just one of them, not the counsel, or I want to be a U.S. attorney for Maryland. He said, what about a federal judge? I said, no, I'm too young. I'm only 26 years old, or somewhere in that area. And so he tried his best to make me U.S. attorney for Maryland. But Carter and he and his wife, Rosalind, and my wife, Barbara, we had a tremendous relationship and a personal relationship with him as president and as candidate for the presidency. Just unbelievable. I just have to believe that God set that up, that a young Black African-American man would have the opportunity to be that close to a U.S. president.
We do have a question from one of our attendees, and they wanted you to expand a little more, and this fits into a question I was going to ask. Can you expand a little more on what we as citizens, and let's, if we can, focus it on what folks in Harford County need to do to support fairness and justice going forward?
Well, that's a very difficult question, Jackie, because I've been removed from Harford County for so long. But let me just say this. Harford County has tremendously changed, as I understand it, from the times that I've been called upon to speak there, in terms of Aberdeen High School, in terms of their commencement, in terms of NAACP and what have you. I know we have tremendous judges, African American, both on the circuit court and the district court that I've been before in Harford County. And so Harford County has come a long way. Now, I think one of the things that we have to recognize and give credit to is the fact that we have a military base in Harford County. And that was a major motive for integration and fairness and justice. And you've got Aberdeen Proving Ground, and I think Edgewood Arsenal is still in Harford County. And so you just had that nucleus. And from that, I think the progressive movement that I saw in Harford County and through the leadership in Harford County, the president of the NAACP, Dr. Spry, and all of those people during my father's time and what have you. In Harford County, the people can come together in terms of the community organizations and what have you. In the times that I've been there, it seems it has one of the opportunities to be a very progressive and outstanding county in the nation in terms of justice and civil rights and what have you. I'm not familiar with any of the local issues of this point in time, but I do know in my young years as a lawyer, I did several cases there in terms of civil rights and property and what have you. But Harford County has made tremendous strides, and I think they have a foundation to work on in terms of bringing everybody in the community together to continue that progression.
Thank you. I want to agree with you. I think Harford County has come a long way from what's described in Patrick Spicer's book. We have another.
Spicer is a great lawyer and a great writer. I've met him several times.
I have one more question. Of all the positions that you've held, what's your favorite and why?
Well, I guess it would have to be private practice and as a trial lawyer. That was my ambition. And even though I dabbled in politics, especially with Carter, being a trial lawyer has been a tremendous opportunity to fight for justice, equality, and allow me to be in the forefront of the civil rights movement in terms of the state and the nation in terms of a lawyer. I was, your callers may not know this, but a few years ago, I was inducted into the National Bar Association Hall of Fame, which is the National Bar Association is the organization of African-American lawyers for the nation. And so that was a tremendous honor. And believe it or not, I couldn't make it because I was in trial. But my daughter and my granddaughter went to California and accepted the award for me. And guess who gave my daughter the award? Vice President Harris.
Oh, how nice.
And so I wrote Vice President Harris. In fact, the letter's on my desk to go out today to remind her of her meeting my daughter to give me the inductee award for the National Bar Association Hall of Fame. And I wrote her in terms of a major letter in terms of saving and moving forward the amended version, the John Lewis version of the Voting Rights Act amended from 1965. So the letter is going out, in fact, today or tomorrow to Vice President Harris. And so I guess my greatest fulfillment has been that God allowed me to be a trial lawyer and to be in the courtrooms for the last 50 years.
I don't see any more questions from our folks. So do you have any last words of guidance for how we might respond to the charge that we have all been given to unify and build bridges? What can we do to make that a reality in Harford County?
Well, I think that one of the major things was this election, because we saw our weaknesses in this nation, we saw our strengths. And we as a nation are a democratic nation that justice and equality and all is in our Constitution. It's part of our mens rea. It's part of the creation of this nation. And so I think that this political period, not to get too political, but this political period that we've gone through was a great teaching moment. And I think that we have to put away some of the divisiveness that we saw in this nation. And we have to politically cross the lines in terms of Republicans and Democrats to be a progressive people in terms of healing our wounds and so forth, and repudiating these hate groups and the hate rhetoric that is so encircled America. And so I think we, as a base for that, have to come together and push legislation and reform and so forth that will now be on the table with the incoming President Biden. And I think certain things have to be brought back. And this might be a little bit broader than your question, but the Voting Rights Act has to be brought back, not just for African American people, but for the nation, because we can see now this push to take away voting rights and to intimidate, have laws of intimidation being put back on the books in terms of states and so forth. That has to be repudiated, and we have to bring back the Voting Rights Act. We have to make sure that our civil rights protection is paramount. But right now, in terms of this nation, in terms of violence, in terms of the police departments, in terms of the type of violence that has been we've seen on television. As a trial lawyer, I used to tell people all about this, Jackie, what was happening in the courtrooms and so forth, and jurors, and nobody could believe me in terms of police violence. And I've handled over, I guess, 50, 75 police cases. Nobody could believe what was taking place until we had the event of technology, and people could actually see from videos and cameras that people were actually getting killed and shot and abused simply because of the color of their skin. And so that police brutality thing, in terms of excuses, in terms of enhancing police brutality and so forth, all of that has to be rectified as a matter of law and a matter of legislation. And we as a nation have to come together to make sure that this nation rectifies some of the wrong patterns that it has taken. And so the only thing I can say to answer your question is that we have a lot of work to do as a nation and a progressive people. But I think that God has given us the light and shown us the light through this past political season of what was splitting this nation. And that has survived all the way from the Civil War and from slavery. And so we don't want to ease back in. So we need unification of the progressive and the liberal groups. And we have common ground that we need to embrace from each other in terms of women's rights and religious rights and sexual rights and so forth. We need to come together as a common unity in terms of civil rights and justice for all. I look back now at some of the laws that have been promulgated, like Stand Your Ground, or this new situation, which I'm trying to think of the wordage of it, but allows police to shoot people in the defenses. They're ignorant of the law is a defense. Those type of archaic laws have to be taken back and restructured. And we as a political body have to support our legislative bodies and our leaders that are going to, in fact, change and put forth progressive laws to protect the constitutional rights. It's in the Constitution, but we need the enforcement of the Constitution. And that has been laxed. And that's a political question that we as a political people have to make sure is enforced and that it is brought to light, and these things that I'm talking about put into law as they were in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, the 1968 Housing Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The struggle is not over, but I do see the unity of the American people in terms of rejecting the hate of the perpetuators of the remnants of the Civil War and coming together for a more progressive and more enlightened and justiciable America. I'm still trying to think of the law, but it won't come to me right now. But all these laws, these negative laws that have been put on the books in terms of a retreat from the era of civil rights have to be rejected. And so I think we as a people, progressive people, have to bring over and educate those people who are still in the 19th century or the 20th century in terms of civil rights and progressive justice for all people. And that's a responsibility we as a people have to take on, and a ladder that we have to climb.
Thank you very, very much for your time with us today. Bill, I'm going to ask you to put up the slide that has the information on how to purchase Dwight's book and how to purchase the various pamphlets from the Historical Society. While Bill does that, I'm going to say that I hope you, our attendees, have enjoyed this discussion under the color of law. Thanks to you, Dwight, on behalf of our attendees and of the Historical Society of Harford County.
Thank you, Jackie, and it's been my honor and my pleasure. And thank you, Bill. My honor and my pleasure. And God bless you and keep you safe.
All right. You can purchase Dwight Pettit's book, Under Color of Law, The Story of an American Family, through Amazon Books. If you're interested in learning more about Harford County's colored schools and the struggle for desegregation, the Historical Society has 4 publications that can help. 2 on the history of colored schools, and 2 that trace the desegregation of the public school system. The last 2 are the ones that we've referred to so frequently in our discussion today. Please visit our website at www.harfordhistory.org, where you can purchase these and many other publications related to Harford County history. If you've enjoyed this presentation, please consider making a donation or becoming a member of the Historical Society of Harford County. We do have a host of upcoming virtual events, and we invite you to join us at these. The first is on Wednesday, February 10th, from 7 to 8 p.m., Finding Scholastic Records for Genealogical Research. On Saturday, February the 13th, from 2 to 3 p.m., we will have a session on the Monpaw Railroad. Oh, the Stories We Can Tell is a new offering from the Historical Society on February the 27th from 2 to 3 p.m., where we tell very specific stories about Harford County. The February edition is on the history of development in the town of Bel Air. And our next Brown Bag Lunch is, we will have the author Charlie Duff, who has written North American Cities. That will be March 9th at 12:30 p.m. All of these events are free. You can reserve your spot today at the Society's website. On the website, you'll find a list of the rest of our coming events, more about the history of Harford County, and instructions for how to join us. The web address again is www.harfordhistory.org. Thank you. Please join us for future events.